The other one I have on the list is kind of in the opposite end of the world of,
Yeah.
of footwear, which is the Xero HSF-II minimalist shoe. And I know you played around with this a little bit with some gym work and walking around. I did some running in this shoe and then walking around a lot in some gym work as well. This is one where I'm gonna do a little more running before our next one just to get a little more feel for it. I coming into this year, I had a little bit of a sore left Achilles tendon, so I've been a little more modest about putting on a shoe like that for any sort of full capacity training. But my philosophy with all that stuff is basically like I want to be at a point where I can tolerate a shoe like that for at least some runs. I don't need to be able to do everything in that. I mean, in the past, I've done 100 milers in like a 3.9 ounce pair of minimalist shoes. So like I know that I can build up the strength to do that if I want to, but the performance world is so much different now with the foams that we have today versus back then when I did that, that even if I did train down to that, it wouldn't give me a performance benefit the way it would have in the past potentially without the super shoe foams. But I do think there's some value in just this foot strength in general, and being able to tolerate a shoe like that is something I want to try to maintain. So I'm going to add more running miles to this shoe. What I liked about this one though, for those that listen to this and they're kind of in the minimalist world and they're just deciding what they want to wear, is this shoe, I felt like from the update from what they did from the prior version, it's just a little more running focused. They added, so some of the real minimalist purists, the ones that are just like, I want just the thinnest slab of rubber in my foot, just so I'm not actually physically touching the ground, just so my sock isn't actually making contact with the
Right.
ground, or barefoot if they're going in there with no socks. They added like a super thin level of midsole to this shoe, which I kind of like because it still has really, really good ground contact feel. If someone's going to be in like maybe one of the more real low profile like Vivo barefoots, they might notice that this is a little more shoe than that between the midsole, and it is got like a pretty good rubber outsole on here with almost like little lugs on there. They're not like aggressive lugs like a trail shoe, but there's more than just like a flat rubber outsole on there. So I think it really reminds me of some of Ultra's early models. Ultra, when they first came out, they used to name their shoes differently on the men's and the women's side. So they had this pair of shoes, like it was one of their very first models called the Adam and Eve.
Oh.
And this shoe reminds me of that, actually. It was like pretty much in the minimalist world, natural foot shape toe box, real good ground feel, but not quite as minimal as you can get. So if I were like a minimalist purist, I would say this is probably like the most structured shoe that I would wear within that framework, which for me, and I think most people running that aren't in that world could maybe look at that as like, this is a good shoe to get if I want to start training that. If I want to start like maybe adding a few like low profile firm shoe runs per week or something like that, and also have a good walk around shoe or gym shoe that they can kind of use in conjunction with that. This shoe's probably a good one for that. The other thing I really liked about it is their lace system goes through these little almost like these little like harnesses on the side, on the outside and the inside of the shoe. So when you pull the laces tighter, it kind of pulls those up, and they're almost just like these little fingers that grip the outside and the inside of your foot. So if you're going to do something like plyometrics or some really more like agility back and forth type stuff, it adds a decent amount of support for that, so you don't feel like you're like rolling over the outsole onto the upper material. And I kind of like that ability to kind of like loosen that if you don't want it, but then tighten it if you do. So like if I'm just walking around, I don't want that. I just want it to feel nice and like just basically like I'm walking barefoot if I can. But then if I'm in the gym and I'm doing plyometrics or something like that, and I want that little bit of extra support feel to it, I can just tighten the laces a little bit and kind of get that play out of it.
Yeah, for sure. I think I'll maybe before our next recording, I'll try to do a few runs in them because, like you kind of mentioned, I think, when you say you want to work up to doing runs in them, is that kind of an indicator for you of maybe you're having the extra foot strength and the stability around your ankle? Just kind of like, if I'm able to do X amount of miles in these, then I know I'm kind of at this point where my feet are possibly a little bit stronger than if I weren't able to do that.
Yeah. I think it's an indicator to some degree of like foot strength, and even just when you think of just the dynamic of the Achilles tendon too, since these shoes are on the ground basically and completely zero drop, you get the full extension of your Achilles tendon. So like, I'll say something maybe a little controversial where it's like when people complain about zero drop, I think I think especially when it's like I guess if I take it like holistically, I would say like I think you should be able to run in a pair of shoes like this if everything is really dialed in. And if you can't, I don't think that's the shoe's fault. I think that just means, hey, there's something that maybe you could improve a little bit, whether that be full range of motion from your Achilles tendon or just the ability to tolerate the firmness of your foot having to take on that level of lack of support or lack of cushion, I guess I should say. And if someone wants to do like a test to kind of see like how it feels differently between like the way your foot muscles work in a shoe like this or in barefoot versus like a shoe, is like go out on like a track or a controlled surface where you kind of know what's coming up ahead of you, so you don't like step on something sharp, and just kind of like go on the straightaway and accelerate and then slow down gradually. When you slow down barefoot, even if you have a pair of like natural shoes on, so I would do this. I would go out the track. I'd put on the Escalante Racers, which isn't anywhere near a minimalist shoe, but it's very much a natural shoe, a little bit lower profile compared to the rest of Ultra's lineup. And I would do that in that shoe, and then I would do it completely barefoot. And even without that Escalante Racer versus barefoot, I could just really feel my foot muscle or legs just activate more aggressively. So, I mean, to what degree? The argument here is like we have these tools that make you not need to do that. So who cares?
Right. Right. If you're never going to need to do that, then why train yourself to be able to do that? But yeah, I don't know if that's
I'm not sure that's a great argument. Yeah. It feels like the way I look at it is like I want my body to be able to tolerate harsh conditions so that if it's exposed to something it wasn't supposed to be exposed to, I don't get hurt from it. And there's going to be a balance there because, I mean, we've talked about this in the past too. If I do everything in that shoe, then it's going to be harder running in certain areas of my body. And if I'm only in that, I probably just won't run as many miles. Whereas I put on some of these premium foams, now maybe I can run extra 15, 20 miles a week. And what does that do to my fitness versus just having really strong lower legs compared to what I would have otherwise? And I think this is where like the balance can be found there where like, all right, if I'm doing my strength work, if I'm wearing something like the Xero shoe for a few runs here and there, and just making sure that that's something I can make strong enough, then I'm probably far enough that I'm not going to have any like huge weaknesses to the degree where they get exposed on race day. But it's also not going to take off the performance element of these super shoes off the table or the ability to maybe get a few extra miles in a week because of the super shoe foam technology and things like that.
Yeah, it makes you almost feel a little bit less guilty about wearing super shoes for every run. I'm like, I'm going to wear super shoes for every run, but then make sure to do some barefoot running too, so that I can like balance the scales a little bit.
It's like eating your broccoli after eating a bunch of like Oreos and stuff.
Yeah, I'll have a salad. It's all good. Yeah, a little bit in that way. But no, I think there's the big debate about should you do a lot of your training or all of your training in super shoes? I certainly don't think you should do all of it in the super shoes, but I've changed my mind a lot recently on, I used to only just use them once a week just for workouts, but I'm like, well, okay, like you just said, if it lets me run, which I believe it is right now, an extra 15 to 20 miles a week, I think the strength I'm gaining from that and the fitness I'm gaining from that is kind of offsetting the extra boost that the super shoes are giving me that's not requiring me to work as hard. But again, I think that everybody should kind of work in. I have one or two shoes that aren't, nothing, there no plate in them, no anything like the Asics and some of the other shoes where I'm going to run in these a couple times per week. And it does feel different. So you're like, oh, I need to kind of keep my body like running in these so I can at least feel the ground and work these muscles that don't get necessarily stressed as much in the super shoes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting. I'm excited. Vivo's going to send us some shoes too, so we'll probably have a lower version of that if you want to go even more aggressive. I think it's going to be fun just to cover a wide range of different stuff and just see what that world's doing out there and build some shoe quivers that kind of have a wide variety of stuff in it and figure out what works for what.
Totally. Yeah, I think that with the Xeros, something I'm going to try to maybe integrate now is what I think when I was in high school and college, I used to do a lot of like once or twice a week, I'd basically do some barefoot running. We'd go on the turf and
Sure.
we'd do 1 or 2 miles after our main run, or maybe just do some barefoot strides. I think that's something I would like to bring back and maybe, do my main run, switch into my barefoot shoes, and then have a nice little kind of 90-second hill incline outside my house that I can do like maybe hill sprints on
Sure.
or something. So put them on for that. I think, just think of these things as like a tool. And then you mentioned I've been using them in the gym. Basically, anytime I have a gym day, a strength workout day, I'm wearing those, and it feels great because I don't like going sockless or barefoot at the gym. I just feel it's a public gym. Like, I don't know. I feel weird doing that. Not that anybody cares, but putting those on, I think it's great. And it's I do all my gym stuff in those. If I'm taking the dog for a walk, I wear those. So just a way to, get some grounding and,
Yeah.
I guess if you want to call it that, but feel the ground when you're walking and get my feet out of these kind of more cushioned types of shoes that I'm wearing most of the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I was thinking about that earlier or at the end of last year too, when I had Courtney Conley come on and she was talking about like natural footwear and like toe splay and all that stuff. And I was curious because I was like, well, I mean, I run a lot, but from a percentage of my actual day standpoint, it's pretty low. Mm-hmm. So my thought was like, what if I'm wearing like a Xero shoe or just completely barefoot, wearing like toe spacers and things like that a lot outside of the running? Like, am I going to like mitigate some of the downsides to like a more restrictive toe box, heel lift, and premium cushion and stuff like that? And I think there is something there. I think like I think where people really go wrong usually is, well, first of all, I think people become like absolutists about any of this stuff, and they think like, oh, I got to be minimalist and everything, or I got to be super shoes and everything. But what I think sometimes what happens is they'll wear like some of these more restrictive performance shoes, and then they'll slide right into something that's also restrictive, or worse yet, maybe like a dress shoe that's like super narrow and high lift, and it's like an extreme version without any of the cushion.
Right. Go to work all day. You're in that shoe for 10 hours.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
I think that's where the damage is really done.
I agree. I would find it hard to believe that even if you're running, the max you can in a day, maybe 3 to 4 hours, that's 10-15% of your day is spent running. Okay, the other 85 to 90% of your day, you're out of them, you're using toe spacers, you're doing all these things to like counteract that. It's similar to like sitting. I mean, it's like, yeah, sitting all day isn't good. If you exercise in the morning, that's good, but you like get up and walk around, you're just like, you're changing these movement patterns to not get, do one thing at once. So it applies to a lot of other things in life than just shoes. But I totally agree. I don't think even if you're wearing the most constrained and cushioned shoe, like you can do things to sort of offset that in the rest of your life. So if you want to train in super shoes all the time, I'm sure there are people out there who do it.
Yeah.
Pros who do it, probably, especially the ones running. I mean, you're running, upwards of 100 miles per week, but, guys doing 110, 120, whatever plus. Yeah. Sometimes you need it. I think it's allowing athletes to train harder, longer, faster. I mean, I think we attribute a lot of the performance, not to go on a tangent, but like the performance improvements we see these days of, oh, it's the shoes that are helping during the race. Well, yeah, that's one aspect of it. But I think what people are not thinking of is, the races, 9 or 1% of your training. Like if these super shoes are allowing you to do everything else outside and train harder, then that's translating to the faster races. I think that's why we're seeing like a lot of the performance improvements. I mean, I've experienced it for myself. Like I can train more. I can do, 75, 80 miles a week now instead of 55 to 60. And, it's going to improve your performance, even if on race day, you're not seeing leaps and bounds maybe from one particular shoe.
I'd love to ask someone like Sarah Hall or even Bekele, who are like in their 40s and have gone through, like we're young enough to remember pre-super shoe and running when that was rally. They definitely remember. So like, they were competing at like an international level in pre-super shoe into super shoe era. And I wonder about like what they attribute their longevity. Obviously there's some uniqueness to them outside of the shoes, but I wonder like if someone like Sarah Hall is performing or able to train at the same capacity as she used to with super shoes, then even without taking on some of the age-related decline that you might see by that point.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, just saving your legs, the wear and tear. I can imagine I'm sure she does, like you said, other things right. But yeah, it's amazing that we were able to. I just remember some of the shoes I used to do like half marathon road races and into workouts. I'm like, man, they were like thinnest little like racing flats. I mean, they call them racing flats for a reason because they were literally flat. It was like less cushion than your daily trainer shoe. So now thinking back, and it's like that was a totally different era. It's
Yep.
crazy.
Right, it was, and this actually maybe is a good transition for us to go into kind of like some of the stuff we were going to talk about. They're independent of what we both did, with the shoes that you'd been using, and then some that I had used historically. Is one thing I find really interesting is when racing flats were sort of the reality for race day, where it was like, okay, I want to get in as small a shoe as I can tolerate. Every brand kind of had a low profile option on their lineup. And then super shoes come out and sort of take the role there. You see, like, you don't see that at all anymore. And I mean, I even saw it like with Ultra Footwear, which is a natural footwear brand. Their shoe cushions just got higher and higher and higher since the super shoe came out, to the degree where now, like, their lowest profile, they've got a gym shoe called the Solstice XT that is a little lower profile, but it's just not a shoe you could really justify doing a lot of running in. You can run in it, but it's heavy. It's got like lateral support. It's a gym shoe. And then the next closest is the Escalante Racer, which is basically a moderate cushion shoe. So it's like even a brand like that kind of has their roots in low profile, natural with like an element of minimalist to it, it has like shifted with the market. So like then you look at it, it's like, so like why would any of these other brands even bother with that sort of a shoe? So then I wonder to some degree, like now we have these brands like Xero and Vivo that are doing pretty well in terms of their market share. I wonder if they're just sort of like stealing maybe some of the people that would have otherwise gone into that still want that aspect of training or footwear, because now they don't have to compete with like any of these other brands because they're just not making that shoe anymore.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think there's always going to be sort of that minimalist, like low profile market that people are going to want to use. Even the people embracing, I think, the super shoe technology, like are going to maybe want to use some of these shoes for different purposes. So, but yeah, it is interesting. We've kind of like shifted the baseline up in terms of like what a low profile or a shoe is, and we're only like going up. I'm sure it will like kind of level down in a little bit and
like 25 millimeters is maybe now like low profile.
Yeah.
It used to be like very much moderate.
Yeah. It is interesting. I mean, I think that just the perception even just changes, because sometimes I'll just like look at a shoe and I'll be like, oh man, that's not very, I'm looking for like something more cushioned than that. Whereas 5 to 10 years ago, that would have been an insane like level of cushion.
Yeah.
So everybody's just out competing themselves, I think, to see who can put the most in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
For better or for worse, I guess.